Hello, good morning, good afternoon. I don't know what time is it, but in between. My name is Gabriela Manuli. I'm the Deputy Director of the Global Investigative Journalism Network. I'm originally from Argentina, but I live in Budapest, Hungary. We just organized the Global Investigative Journalism Conference in Gothenburg. We had more than 2,000, no, not more, almost 2,200 investigative journalists there learning about tips and tools, and we also had a session like this one. I co-founded the GIJN Women Group that I have here in my notes. It's a group created by GIJN to discuss issues related to women and non-binary investigative journalists. The group currently has 450 members from almost 100 countries, and we keep growing. But as I like to say, the strength of GIJN Women is not in the numbers, it's in the network. We aim to create a safe space where we can discuss, we can support each other. Everybody's welcome to join. We do, of course, we started during the pandemic, so mostly we started doing online meetings, which are not webinars, they are not recorded, they are here where we invite a guest speaker to share things, and then, of course, then we move to real life, and we've been organizing women meetups in different conferences. We aim to expand. It's kind of my passion project, so I always try to gather useful information, fellowships, anything that can help advance your career, books to read, movies to watch, and invite a lot of great speakers. Some of them are here. They came to the meetup, so they are all welcome to join. When we started this group after the 2019 conference in Hamburg, where we had also an all-women panel, we realized that there are a lot of issues that we have in common. As journalists, we have all the training about how to report, how to do investigations, but we lack a lot of time training on issues related with leadership, with management, and we need to learn on spot. We are also working in a heavy male-dominated environment, especially in some areas of the world. In some other areas, that's changing, and it's good to see, but there is still a lot to do. When we sent a survey to all our members, the leadership and management techniques, almost 70% of our members said that they wanted to learn more about that, and that's what we always try to aim. So that's why we have here this session. Sometimes when I invite speakers to come to these women's sessions, I say, okay, but I don't come from Afghanistan or areas like this. I don't feel like I have the right to come and complain about how difficult it is to be a woman. And I always tell them that that's not the aim of these sessions. The aim of these sessions is acknowledge that we are different, that in general, even though we cannot generalize, we are facing different difficulties, and we can learn from each other. So when you come to this session, especially like today, the idea is that you live inspired and you learn. It's not that we are here to complain, and we can complain, of course, and everybody's welcome, but we are also here to inspire you and to try to show you what we did or what we did wrong or what we did right, and what you can take either as a female, but also if you are a male and you are dealing with women colleagues, and the idea is just to inspire each other. So I'm the moderator, so I'm not going to speak very long, but the idea is that each of my awesome speakers will have a short presentation about a different topic related with the leadership. Then I will ask a few questions, and then the idea is to have enough time for all of you to ask whatever is on your mind. And of course, this is a 50-minute session. Maybe we don't get to all the questions, but we are around today and tomorrow. We have the Global Investigative Journalism Network is here in the Media Village, so you are welcome to come and keep the discussions going. So we are going to start with our first speaker. She is Manisha Ganguly, and sorry if I'm pronouncing wrong. She defines herself as an investigative journalist/academic. She's an investigations correspondent at The Guardian, focusing on international conflict and dissidents, And she's an award-winning journalist and documentary producer known for pioneering open source investigation. Here is Electra, our resident GIJNer, baby. She's known for pioneering open source investigations and to expose war crimes. And she's going to talk now, and I think Manisha is a perfect example of working in two, not just one, or maybe even three male-dominated areas. So go ahead, Manisha, enlighten us.
Thank you, Gabby. So as you mentioned already, I work at the intersection of two, maybe three heavily male-dominated fields, which is open source investigations, documentary filmmaking, and investigative journalism. When I started out with open source investigations, I was always acutely aware that not only was there no one who looked like me, there were just no women, which is the problem that you have in old STEM fields. So when I was doing my PhD, which was looking at how open source was changing investigative journalism, I was interviewing 30 people, and I wanted a 50-50 gender split. And I was asking around in all the usual places, and nobody knew any women who were doing open source. So on Ada Lovelace Day, Ada Lovelace, I don't know if you know, was one of the founders of the modern computer. On Ada Lovelace Day, I put out a call on Twitter, and I managed to come up with about 50 different women in open source who were doing hardcore conflict reporting. And that's when I realized is that these women exist, they just have no visibility. And that's when I started looking at the politics of who gets credited in investigations. A lot of you might be very familiar with the original Pentagon Papers. You might also know the names of the male journalists who worked on it, but what you might not know is that there were a group of women who worked on it but were never given credit by the Washington Post. This was happening 20, 30 years ago. But what I found during my research is that these credit politics still exist in newsrooms at the New York Times, at the BBC, at the Washington Post. Pretty much every newsroom I spoke to, women complained about two things. One is that they're working harder than the men, and two, that they're not getting any credit for even the double amount of work that they're doing. And then the second part of it is documentary filmmaking. Obviously, when I started out, so documentary conflict reporting is a heavy male-dominated space. You're all familiar with the stereotype of the sort of male, rugged war reporter who goes off and saves the world. So I never really wanted to go into documentary filmmaking because I just never thought it was something for me. I was never represented. So when I fell into it, I also started becoming very aware of the set politics. So for my first documentary film, which was investigating war crimes in Libya, which eventually the evidence ended up at the International Criminal Court, I tried to put together an all-women team, primarily because I wanted to prove a point that a bunch of women can get together and make a film that wins awards. Unfortunately, I was never able to repeat it again. I think probably because the editors got too scared. What if women start making films on their own? But then the other thing that I was always acutely aware of is also the age factor. If you're a young woman on set, and I saw this happening across the films I was making, a lot of the time I was the only woman on set, and I'd hire a camera person who I'd be directing, who'd be a 50-something-year-old male who'd come in with all his cameras, and he'd look around at the set, he'd spot me, come up to me, and ask him to fetch him coffee while he waited for the producer. And I had the sort of awkward responsibility of informing him that I was the producer. Don't worry, he was not rehired again. But then, in terms of leadership, I guess the bit that I learned when I was working, again, for my first Libya film, I think the key thing that I learned is not to ask for permission. When I was working on the Libya film, I was at CNN, and I was told that this is not how we do investigations, because open source still wasn't a thing, because it hadn't won the requisite number of Pulitzers or Emmys needed to become a thing in investigative journalism. And when I moved to the BBC at the time, the BBC were very interested in the idea, but again, they said, we don't have budget. I was at Newsnight at the time, which is the primetime current affairs show. So I went to the BBC Middle East team, and I said, can you make this film? And they said the same thing, which is we don't have budget. So I decided to play them off against each other combine the budget and then make the film. And it was only halfway through the project that they both realized that they'd been tricked into making this film that they both wanted to do, but wanted to do it exclusively. And that was when I realized that it's always better to ask for forgiveness than permission, because no one is going to, especially if you're in a male-dominated environment, nobody's going to wait for you to speak. Nobody's going to give you that space. You really have to fight for it and carve it out.
Wow, thank you. Ask forgiveness, not permission. Is it working? Yeah? Thank you, Manisha. So I'm saving my questions for asking all of you. I have some questions that they told me they're tough, so I'm sorry about that. So our next speaker, she's Emilia Díaz-Struck. She's the recently appointed GIJN Executive Director. She's been on the position less than a week, so congratulations on being my boss. So she's a formerly data and research editor and Latin American coordinator and the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, ICIJ. And she took part in more than 20 ICIJ award-winning investigative collaborations. So, Emmy, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much. So I think that collaborations strengthen our capacity and actually expand how we can work as women leaders. So, and that's part of the lesson I've learned all these years. And a big part of my work, like in the last 15 years, has been like through collaborations, starting in my home country, Venezuela, then in Latin America, and then at a global scale. And something that like we can learn from how do we work in an environment that actually it's good, like it has helped expand the reach of women in investigative journalism when you have collaborations and you need so many different skill sets, then we empower ourselves together. So it's kind of like stronger together. Something that we have in terms of how do you lead projects, how do you coordinate, so you bring soft skills to tough situations. So we are investigating very complicated topics. We are talking about stories that reveal money laundering, like human rights abuses, corruption, and at the same time, you're managing hundreds of people around the world. So like, how do you bring and connect people to be able to uncover all these stories that are relevant for citizens around the world? And here comes the human factor. So, which is basically, and that comes when we're working with data too, because my heart is also with data and investigations. So, basically, when we are working with people, we need to build and detect what are strengths of people. And those are the diversity, the mix of skills that people bring. So, if we clone everyone and everyone brings the same, then we will all be looking at the same thing. When you're working on collaborations, you also have, like, besides, of course, the gender representation, the regional representation. So everyone brings their own skills, their own sources, and that mix of skills is what makes magic happen. That's how, like, you make collaborations powerful and work. And that needs to come with rules at the beginning, so that you also learn. So you can be soft, you can be kind to people, but you need to be clear about how you're going to work with everyone. So we bring those soft skills to like very complicated investigations and collaborations, and how that helps you bring people together. But with clarity on how are we going to work, what are the deadlines, and what are the key roles everyone is going to have in a collaboration. So you require a lot of coordination, and you require also something that you start developing, which is the anticipate problems. But anticipate problems not to create them, but to actually to solve them, so that the problems don't arrive when you're working on these projects. So basically, you try to find what are the common spaces, what are the common grounds when you're working, and how do you lead and engage people. So, and that's where, like, you don't need to be doing it exactly the same as other people have been doing. You need to embrace what are your skills. Like, also, like, I bring like some of the, probably not the softness of women, but also from Latin America. So, like, and I embrace that. Like, so embracing who you are when you're bringing that to a project, and that adds to the capacity of a team. So when you're like, and when you start highlighting those skills, like when you're working together as a team, you have other female colleagues getting encouraged to be able to work and develop their capacity in their teams. Is this like, to me, like to be quiet, or is this like just exciting? Okay, we will celebrate this and dance now.
I don't know, but we can just take a moment to enjoy the music, right? It's
Yes.
a nice music.
Nice.
Nice.
So, and that comes to the, when working with data, something we did once, like when I was working at ICIJ, was actually, we convinced 85 journalists to extract data, and together with a colleague, a male colleague, but we ended up, like, I ended up branding it as a data extraction party. So like celebrating like the concept of partying, but doing some very complicated work and putting everything on a spreadsheet. But to me, the lesson has been, you can continue being yourself while working on collaborations, and like basically working and embracing like the differences is how you actually grow and keep bringing more women in the field of investigative journalism. So that's a bit like what I wanted to share, and of course we can talk more about the leadership techniques and find like other mentors and women and other people who empower you, like, and then you give back and you mentor others too. And that's how we continue doing investigations on tough topics while also being ourselves.
Thank you, Emmy. Yeah, I think the embrace your accent in a way summarize a lot of things. I think long is a time where diversity, it's not a plus, and where I think we all need to embrace what we bring different to the table. So, and hopefully we can keep also growing the diversity in the media ecosystem everywhere. So thank you, Emmy, and more questions to come. And then next one will be Marcela Turati. She's a reporter and co-founder on Quinto Elemento Lab. She's a Mexican reporter, probably one of the most famous Mexican reporters and Latinas reporter everywhere. She is specialized in the coverage of the enforced disappearances of people, massacre of immigrants, attacks against journalists, and the victims of grave human rights violations. So she is really working in a very tough environment. So and also I really admire the work she's been doing in terms of protecting the mental health of all her colleagues and all the Mexican journalists out there. So go ahead, Marcel.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. Yes, as Gabi said, I cover many years disappearances, and for example, I started covering a reporter, Ciudad Juárez, that it was like the most violent city in America for some years. And what I realized as journalist is that always finishing the coverage, journalists go to bars and we drink a lot, and then we start talking about what happened, and that those are the places where we process all the things that we saw, no? Even photographers, and in sometimes even people start crying, but we allow it because we drink alcohol, no? And for many time, I was thinking like, why we only process this in this way, no? And why we cannot take it away or create spaces to talk about these topics about our traumas outside of the bars, no? So I have been like many years trying to create networks of journalists to work together, and many of the members of these networks are women, always. Like the men are kind of disappear in this organizing people or this giving some trainings, and we receive in Mexico a lot of trainings of digital security, physical security, legal support, all these things, but always was missing the thing about your own trauma or how to interview victims, like these other topics that are not generally are not taken as important. So with my teams, because I have been in different organizations and create different projects, we start thinking that it will be good to have a time to emotional checkup. So every month we do a meeting only for this checking, to see how are you in your life, no? What is happening, because sometimes a reporter cannot finish a deadline or something, and it has a parent in the hospital, and you don't know it has these people, or she has COVID, and you never notice about it, no? So check up emotionally. Also, if somebody is feeling or paranoid or fear, or something is happening, in these spaces we talk, and and we have mezcal, or we have beer, sorry, but we did it in Zoom, because we work remotely and we live in different parts of the country, so we give space to each one to talk, no, and in those spaces, I think that we generate a communitarian, a group who take care of the others, no? Like a communitarian support, that I, as leader, I know that they create their own bridge and their own supports, and that the whole group help somebody who said that something was happening, no? So this is one of the things that I try always to do. Also, when we did a really, really stressful investigation, that we were all together, living together, investigating something that touches us a lot, and it was a crime of another journalist, we felt really, we felt that the investigation was not working well, that something was happening, that we don't have good communication. We had a lot of fights. So in that moment, I say, okay, we have a grant for security. Maybe we can use it for therapies. And it was really good idea. And I always say okay, we are still friends because we have this groupal therapy, and one therapist that we know and that we trust in him. So we bring together, so everybody start talking about what's happening, and then I realized that there was people in the team that was boycotting the investigation because they were really, really terrorized. They feel a lot of fear. And when listening one to each other when somebody mediating, it was really good to understand, okay, we have to stop this investigation in this way. We have to make many changes and take our time. And also, some people needed therapy, individual therapy. And that is the other thing that I always try to be in with my team, because we have to cover mass graves or morgues, or be with people who are looking their disappeared children. That is really, really painful. So that they can say okay, I need a break, I'm feeling bad. And I try, as we don't have enough money, no? I try always to look for therapists who can give us for free or something, no? Or NGOs who can give us therapies for those who need it. What I have noticed is that many times we disconnect from our own fear, and that puts you in risk, because you don't listen. In Mexico, we normalize all the threats, and you always are in problems. So you don't distinguish when it's a real threat and when it's not real or what is paranoid. So some journalists that I know, and when I investigate, like what happened if they receive threats or they get injured, many of them, they just minimize this, and we are always like, yes, disconnecting of our fear. So it's really important to have these spaces and these kind of therapies or talk with other peers to see if this is the fear that I have is something important, no? And to normalize and to say, okay, I don't want now to do this investigation. It's okay, in a more lovely way to do it, and not like with a lot of sacrifice and pain, like a different, like as we were taught, no, in past years. So I think those are the things that I learned also when we do some workshops. We open a space for the people to talk about. We are journalists who cover a lot of interview people in pain, no? A lot of victims of violence. So we open a space for the people to speak about the guilt, because many times we commit a lot of mistakes, and I know a lot of journalists who just cannot continue doing their work because they feel paralyzed for what they did. So we can create these kind of spaces for talk about this, the fear, the guilt is the family, and different things. And also at the end, like feel like that we are kind of liberated. And some of our workshops have all this physical, digital security, but we always try to bring these other elements to continue touching the sense of why we are doing what we are doing, why it's important, for whom it's important, but also remembering or reminding about ourselves as a person who deserve to live happy and to have a good life. No? Thank you.
Thank you, Marta. It's hard to continue. I feel a little bit emotional after Marce, but yeah. So, and I think it's important, and we've been talking about this, to also sometimes address the causes of burnout, and there is all this wellness speech, or like, okay, just take a bath and light a candle, but a lot of the burnout we journalists or journalists on the front line are facing is due to structural barriers and so it needs a little bit more than a hot bath and a candle, and I really value all you are doing on all your plans you have to keep doing and developing resilience. So our last speaker is a dear colleague. She's our local Greek, which is Nikolia Apostolou. I always pronounce wrong. She's GIJN Resource Center Director. Prior to joining GIJN, she wrote stories and produced documentaries from Greece, Cyprus, and Turkey from more than 100 media outlets like the BBC, Associated Press, and a million of others. So I really always like to have her on stage because she gives a good balance between a lot of experience as a freelancer and as a woman freelancer, and now also from, in a way, the other side, more from being a commissioning editor and a resource center person and working with a lot of journalists, including freelancers. So looking forward to your tips.
Thank you. So I wanted to talk about the imposter syndrome. I think a lot of female journalists have this, also some male for sure. So, there's this little voice in your head that tells you that you're not good enough, whatever you do, no matter the facts, that you know, you've been published in top media outlets, but despite that, you feel that, you know, your writing isn't good enough, your research isn't good enough, your video isn't good enough. So as a freelancer, I had that for sure, and I only found about it like 2 years ago in a GIJN women's session when Marina Walker from ICIJ, then ICIJ, talked about it. And I realized it because, you know, as a freelancer, it's like a steep learning experience that you have to go through. You have to do everything yourself. So I just want to encourage anyone that has that little, you know, voice in their head, like, don't listen to it. It's fine. Just ignore it. And also I was doing a lot of filming myself, so like in the field work, a lot of men, you know, colleagues would comment, you know, that you're a producer, like you're not a filmmaker, or so I again like ignore all these you know, little voices around you that try to make you feel worse and put you down. Also, I think as a freelancer, you tend to want to continue working on your own, but I think that we have to ditch that prototype of the lone wolf, and we need to move more on to collaborations and work together instead of against each other. It doesn't make sense to, you know, antagonize with colleagues, but rather, you know, to get together, do the research together, do the grants together. Another tip I'd have for women journalists is apply to as many awards as possible, apply to as many grants as possible, and to fellowships. I remember a few years ago, the World Press Awards were saying that only 10 or 20% of applications were from women photographers. And that's partly because, you know, when women are applying for a job, they feel that they have to have all the qualifications and then they'd apply, while men, you know, just might have only like 50% or 60% of the qualifications needed, but that won't hinder them from applying. So it's how, like, society has raised us to want to be perfect, and, you know, and then we'd apply for a job. And I'd like to end here and just open for questions.
Thank you. Yeah, the good girl syndrome, right? We are good girls. So I will ask a few questions. I ask my speakers. I'm very attached to them, so I always call my speakers, sorry. If we could keep it like more like a brief, so then we can also move to audience questions. My questions are for whoever wants to take them. You don't need to all answer all of them. But my first one would be like, I think in a lot of times, because of this good girl and being perfect, we are not very used to just admit that we can fail and experiment. And so in a way, we need to learn a little bit more about fail and failing better and quicker so we can then succeed. But on the other hand, in general, at least in my experience, we are women more ready to say sorry or acknowledge our mistakes and learn from them. So my first question is if you can go back in time and try to remember something you learned from your own mistake.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because we always like want to do everything, and we learn a lot. Like, so I remember like taking every single class, every single workshop, everything. So I would know everything about like investigative journalism, all techniques, so I could do all what was needed. And particularly in my home country, then like in some other parts of the world, many roles are divided. Like in my home country, like a bit like then I was doing many things at the same time. But then what I learned like by doing that is you actually need to learn to say, I don't know. Because sometimes we always like want to say and show, yes, I know about all these things and these amazing things, but actually started with the I don't know, and finding amazing people who know what you don't know actually makes you stronger. And that was the lesson for me. Thank you.
Who wants to be next? I don't know if I want to leave you, skip this question. Marce, no? Yeah.
What I learned, always, for example, when I have this imposter syndrome, no? And always when I win a prize or something, for example, I remember always refreshing the web page in case of they have a mistake, and they say, oh, yes, it was not you, no? Always with nightmares and always feeling like I don't deserve it, or I am the quota, the quota, because they need a Hispanic and woman or Mexican, always like trying to do some kind of logic why they choose me, until one day I say, okay, I engañé, I
Deceive.
Yes, I engañé to everybody, yes, and I survive. So one day I say like, okay, you do sometimes, you do good things also, and like, and say, it's okay, no? And also ask for a promotion. I always feeling ashamed of say like, I want to, yes, I receive kind of more money, you know? And I always talking about what I do wrong. And I know that I do this wrong, and I am not good in this. I always approach in this way, and now I always like copy the men, and I analyze, and I say, okay, how they act, and like, it's because it's me, you have to give me like a promotion, no? So I go, and sometimes I say like, okay, I will be paid for this. And many times, even when they invite you to something, and I always do many things for free, but I start like asking like, okay, but there is a payment for this? And the people answer, yes, I forgot to tell you that there is a payment.
Little.
It's a lot of times that happen that, so it's kind of my mantra, only to ask if there is a payment, and yes, many times there is an extra, and it's good.
Yeah. You were talking about this with me a lot too, right?
Yes.
As a freelancer.
Yes, as a freelancer, I started at my after 10 years, I think, or 14 years, asking for more money. It took a while, but actually, editors have budgets, so they actually would say yes. So if you don't ask, you're not going to get it. So that was what I learned.
And that could be your mistake too, in a way.
Oh, it is.
Yeah, it is. Manisha, you want to go next?
Yeah, just building on from what Marcela said, what I realized in the newsroom is that women are much better at doing the work, and men are much better at showing that they're doing the work. So for me, it took a learning curve to actually not just squirrel away in my room or in the conference room and speak to 50 sources in a week. If nobody saw me do that, the work didn't happen, which meant that I wouldn't get any appreciation from the editor. And oftentimes, as a documentary producer, I'd work with male researchers who'd then go off and be like, I've been in X, Y, and Z meetings, and not mention the fact that I'd set the meetings up or done the work. So I realized that part of doing the work in a newsroom is also letting everyone know that you're present and doing the work. Otherwise, they'll forget you exist.
Yeah, and I remember in one of our meetups, we brought a leadership expert, and she said, you need to do the work, you need to be in the newsroom, but also you need to be at the bars, you need to be at the networking. A lot of times they say, no, I stay in the newsroom, I will finish the story, but the networking part is where things are happening. And so of course, you need to balance, but you also need to make sure that you are present in those decision areas that might be where out of the newsroom or at a party or anything like that. So I'm going to ask, let me see, I have a lot of questions, but I want to have questions for the audience. So also very brief, but do you feel that investigative journalism is male-dominated environment in your region? And if yes, because it can vary, how do you cope with it?
I think in Mexico, not now. I think the violence makes some things really interesting. that many women journalists start organizing and creating collectives, and I think the most powerful investigative journalists are women. And that is a surprise, but this is really good.
Yeah, and also in Latin America, a lot of the investigative reporting center and nonprofits, you can see more and more women as executive directors or leadership positions, so it's a good trend. What do you think, Manisha?
Well,
You said already, but yeah.
I mean, in terms of the UK, what I remember when I was starting out, I got really lucky because I happened to end up with two female investigative editors back to back, who really sort of pushed me forward and told me that my ideas are valid and they're good, and made sure that I always got space or in a paper or got airtime. And I pretty much owe my career to them. But again, I spent sort of 5 years doing war crimes investigations, making documentaries. Majority of the time, I was the only woman in the room. I was the only person of color in the room, or I was the only woman of color in the room. Even now in my current team, I think there's 3 of us. The Guardian is much better at the gender breakdown, but I think there needs to be more women, not at the investigations editor level, but at the editor-in-chief level, because the investigation editor gets given a budget, right? But it's the editor-in-chief who controls the budget. So I think that's something that's still missing in the UK media landscape. I'm lucky because, again, I work for probably the only newspaper in the UK that has a female editor-in-chief and actually values those things, but that's not the norm, it's the exception.
Thank you. Emmy?
Well, I have seen variations across regions, like Latin America, as you were pointing. Like, I see both amazing female and male journalists leading efforts, and it's I think it's like, as Marcela is saying, in Mexico. I see that across other countries in Latin America too, which is exciting. Some regions that, well, we don't have someone from that region here, but like Africa is still, I think, we have underrepresentation of women in investigative journalism. I still remember some workshops I gave some years ago where, like, I think about 80% of the attendees were men. And I remember we were last week with a female colleague, and I was asking, has this changed in Africa? And she said, unfortunately, not yet. So I know that there are lots of efforts, but it varies a bit by region. So, but I think Africa is among the ones where we still see, and it's because of the context, because of conflict situations. So there is there are many aspects that have led to that situation, but we have seen more. So we have amazing, I've met great also female African investigative journalists.
Thank you. How about here?
It's still male-dominated.
See? Yeah. We are talking.
But I would like to recognize the previous generation of women journalists that broke the barrier, and I think we owe them a lot. I can't imagine what they've been through, like sexual abuse and not being recognized. I've heard horror stories, and thanks to them, we're here, I think.
That's nice. Before we go to questions from the audience, I'm going to ask a question, but you need to answer in bullet points. So I think all of us know that we had great mentors, which in a lot of cases happen to be female. So can you give in bullet point 2-3 tips for people who are trying to find a mentor for advancing in their career?
Fellowships is a way to find a mentor.
Yeah, and conference. And I have to say, my first great mentor was a man, so trust both men and women. So you can have both great male and female mentors, and he opened up all the global network, all the Latin American networks.
Yeah, more than one at the same time, right? So you can have more than one at the same time.
Exactly, so. But you can have more than one. You don't need to stay stuck to one, so you have great mixed skills between men and female colleagues, and if find allies, find people who believe in you, and go to events, conferences, take workshops. That's how you start building a network and find great allies who can then become mentors and friends.
Completely agree with Emilia. I have a male and a female mentor, and I think they both bring very different perspectives. But I have a sort of more targeted approach. If I find a journalist whose work I absolutely love, just send them a DM on Twitter back when it used to be called Twitter, or I just keep emailing them. Or that's literally how I ended up with these mentors, because I was always very focused on the person who I wanted to mentor me, because I wanted to know their methodology and techniques and tips for success. So I think I prefer a more sort of focused approach where you find out everything about their work, and also that shows that you really care about their work, and that's why they're more willing to speak to you.
And you will be surprised by how many people will be open even for a 20-minute Zoom coffee. So don't hesitate to ask. People are happy to give back. And if they said no, just don't take it personally and move to your next prospect mentor. So, Marce?
Have confidence in your intuitions and your sixth sense. Like, you have it. Like, something smells bad, but sometimes we think and analyze a lot, and something is, I don't know, that trust in your sixth sense.
Great. So we are going to open up for questions. So I see a hand there. Yeah. Please keep the questions brief and introduce yourself too.
Hi, I'm Lily Mendonça. I work for the Bureau of Investigative Journalism in London. So first of all, thank you so much for this panel, and thank you for bringing up the imposter syndrome topic. It's something that I personally struggle with a lot, and it's lovely to see this being discussed widely. My question is actually about mental health. So it's great that we are talking about this, but this is a taboo topic. We're not, as journalists, talking about this often in newsrooms, and especially senior management team, they're not really aware of how important this is, especially considering the type of work that we do. So I just would like to ask you guys to give us some advice or tips on how to discuss this with your editors in traditional newsrooms, and how we can convince them that we need to talk about this more often. Thank you.
So the way, part of my PhD looks at sort of trauma, PTSD, and mental health in journalists doing war crimes investigations. And I completely agree with what Marcela said about sort of creating that culture. But most news organizations are for-profit, and that's where that discrepancy comes from, right? Because they don't care about you as a person, they care about profit for the organization. So the one way that you can reframe this is in terms of productivity. So if you have those mental health conversations, if you have those breaks from burnout, it actually makes you a better journalist. It means that you have that distance to step away from something you've got too close to find a new perspective, especially when you're stuck. And there's lots of studies that show that taking regular breaks, especially just before you reach burnout, actually improves productivity when you come back from that stage of almost hitting burnout. So pose it as a profit incentive, right? Just tell them that you're going to get a better story if you let me take this weekend off after I've been working 3 weekends, because I'll come back with new ideas and a fresher perspective, and I'll be a better writer.
And in my case, I have the experience that when I said that I don't want to travel to cover something, my boss say, okay, like, you are not good in job, no? Like, I am afraid, I feel really fear. So what first, I always say to the people that maybe your media don't want because they think that is not important, but you can create a peer-to-peer support and a group of friends who understand what you are covering, and to try to just do this check-in, psycho-emotional check-in, and also create like your own personal board, no, in life. As the organization have a board, you can have also people who can say to you like the limits. But it's good in the newsrooms to bring specialists like Dart Center, or in Mexico there are others, to give these talks about trauma or PTSD or different things, or self-care, whatever, and open the discussion. I think when we start listening to this, everybody say like, oh yes, it happened to me, and yeah, the boss, the editors, and they say like, okay, yes, it's totally fine, but first there is a resistance about talking about this.
Just one more thing. Definitely unionize your newsroom. It's much easier to do collective bargaining.
Last question. And while we find the questions, I would say as a leader, don't say, because a lot of this mental health, like you are saying someone, take your weekend off and you are sending this email in a weekend. So it's a kind of like, you really need to take action and not just talk about mental health. So, yeah, second row. And then you can find us around the conference for more questions.
Hello. I work for World Press Photo Awards, and it's very true what you said, Nikolia. It's actually, I think, a bit lower, the percentage. But I'm wondering, because of 2 years ago, we set up in the awards a representation criteria where the jury has to award in each of the 6 regions that we've defined in the world, one female or non-binary identifying photographer. But the past year, for the region of Europe, the jury came back to us saying that there just isn't a project that's good enough from a female photographer, and we let it pass. But I'm wondering, the argument that they gave, part of the argument was that they felt that the photographer, if they are awarded, they would sense that this was kind of just fitting the diversity quota, and they would feel offended. And I'm wondering what you feel about that, because I personally disagree. But has that ever happened to you, and do you think it was right?
I agree with you and disagree with that idea. I don't know. Manisha, you mentioned the diversity quota. It hasn't happened to me, so I'm not sure how to respond. Sorry.
No, I think the issue with tokenism has a much simpler solution. If there aren't good enough female and non-binary reporters submitting to the competition, start training women and non-binary photographers. I think they're looking at diversity in a completely different way, which is tokenistic, and is just about representation for the sake of representation, but not for progress and for actual inclusivity.
And at GIJN, we have fellowships, and we always have 50% quota, 50% division between men and women, and we always find a lot of great women journalists.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. It's also a question, to, as she said, of thinking before. What did you do for outreach? Did you reach to gender organizations? Did you really, because it's hard to believe that there are not good women photographers in Europe, but I don't know if you have anything else to add.
Yeah, I think like we need to like address this also as building capacity, like, you know, like, and encourage, like, because if you have more training, like more like development, more skills, like you will have more women also doing amazing work, and then like building, like networking and service of it's encouraging like great people that you know who have done this work, so you have more people applying for those. But start from the beginning, and it's like we want more women in the field than like doing photography. Then what are we doing for that? Like, so I think that's the other part of the equation. Yeah.
Yeah, and I welcome all these ideas. You can always send me an email, because as I say, GIJN Women is growing, and we will try our best to build capacity and to work on a lot on these structural issues. So hopefully we will make it happen. Thank you very much. Go on it.